on a very topical discussion on Lord Ram. I mean, he's everywhere from Ayodhya to Nepal to Times Square in the New York. What is happening? You know, it's as if Lord Ram has got yet another resurrection of sorts. Pavanji.
No, I think that the building of the temple was a matter of celebration for Hindus, the foundation stone laying ceremony, but for, I think, people from all communities and religions, because it was the solution to a very long pending dispute, a dispute which has lasted over a century. And it was done pursuant to, I think, what Lord Ram stands for, Maryada Purushottam, in accordance with law and pursuant to a Supreme Court judgment. So, I think it was a cause of celebration, and I think Hindus felt vindicated in a sense that at the birthplace of Lord Ram, as they believe by faith, and faith is beyond a point, beyond interrogation in any religion. They believed that this was the spot where Ram was born. Ayodhya was his city. They have been fighting to build a temple that suitably honors both the locale and the person. And finally, it was done in accordance with the Supreme Court judgment, marking a closure to a long-standing dispute. So it was a matter of celebration. And since Indians are everywhere, from New York to people and Hindus in Nepal and elsewhere, so it was celebrated outside India as well.
No, but I'm also talking about the row that was kicked by Nepal Prime Minister Oli when he declared that Lord Ram was indeed a Nepali because he was born in Ayodhya.
I don't think we should contest these things, you know. I think Sri Ram belongs to Hindus everywhere. And he is, you know, territorial boundaries have come recently. It's the controversy of whether Gautam Buddha belongs to Nepal because of Lumbini or India. But territorial boundaries are a recent phenomenon. I remember Amartya Sen in the Argumentative Indian writes that no, Panini, the great Sanskritologist, was not an Indian, he was an Afghani. Because he was born then in Afghanistan, but at that time Afghanistan itself was a part of the Mauryan Empire. So, I mean, we should not be taken in by the territorial configurations today. If Nepal, the Hindus of Nepal make a claim, we should say we are willing to share Ram. He's as much yours as ours.
Right. Advaita, what do you have to say to that?
I mean, I find Mr. Oli very amusing. You know, first of all, he is himself a Kumauni, which is in Uttarakhand. And so I think, you know, if we're going to get territorial about this, you know, he might need to relocate. And on top of that, you know, I mean, for being a communist, you know, I welcome the fact that he's so fervent about Ram and, you know, his sort of where he comes from and things like that. But I think these are really silly kind of arguments that politicians from time to time in the subcontinent engender. So just to get a little attention and to, you know, make a noise about something. So a bit of that. I don't really think it's anything serious.
No, right. My great good friend, the head of the CPIM, was with me in college. He's called Sita Ram.
Sita Ram, yes.
That's all right. Advaita, that's fine.
Right. Now my question is about the book. Pavanji, did you, and you have to be really honest here, did you time the book very strategically?
I wish I knew what the Supreme Court was going to decide, and I wish I knew when the temple was being actually, the building was to commence. But I was writing this book for some time, and the reason, Nishtha, was very simple. You know, I've grown up, although not as deeply as I would have liked to, you know. When you go to St. Columbus, St. Xavier, St. Stephen's, you begin to think and write only in English. So but I've grown up with the Ramcharitmanas, Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas. For many people in North India, and it's been described as the Bible of North India for Hindus. So the Ramcharitmanas was for me a remarkable book, and a study of it was an extremely rewarding experience. And I wanted to make the selections and write the commentaries for a couple of reasons. One is the retelling of the story of Lord Ram, Maryada Purushottam Ram, which 2000 years earlier, if not more, Valmiki wrote. Secondly, I found quite fascinating when I commenced my study, and this was after I wrote my book on Adi Shankaracharya, that Tulsidas carries forward in a remarkable way, in the context of Sri Ram, the Hindu philosophical dialectic between Nirgun and Sagun. You know, the attributeless divine and the divine with attributes, the Nirgun Sagun debate between Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya and Ram Rajya. And he carries this forward, and he brings in from philosophy but also from religious practice a remarkably new element called Bhakti. That the way to bridge the Nirgun Sagun divide, Nishtha, if you're going to shake so much, I'm very distracted. So therefore, there was this philosophical dialectic which Tulsidas continues. And I'll give examples of it in the course of this conversation. This whole business of Nirgun Sagun. You know, the Aguna Sagun, Doi Brahma Sarupa, Akata Agatha, Anadi Anupa. He says, he bridges that. He says they are both a manifestation of that same ultimate, not God, which is Brahm, which is Adrisht, Avyakt, Akhand, Achintya, Nirgun, Nirvishesh Chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness, just basically that consciousness without form takes form in the form of Sri Ram, for instance, whom he considered the greatest avatar of that great sublime pulsating consciousness pervading the cosmos. So this debate is carried out. And a third reason, as I mentioned just now, of Bhakti, that the way to move forward for a genuine devotee seeking succor, salvation, moksha, contentment, happiness, joy, call it what you may, is not to get into a philosophical quibble, but to surrender, prapatti, bhakti. You know, that in any case, in the context of the times, if you understand, was a very powerful movement in India. And lastly, I found the Ramcharitmanas remarkably a wise book with nuggets of wisdom that relate to our common life every day. So it's not about just Ram's story, which it is. It's not only about philosophy, which it is. It is also about these, you know, for instance, he will just say offhand in between describing something, Nahi koi as janma jag mahi, prabhuta pai jahi mad nahi. No one yet has been born on this earth who, when he gets power, does not become arrogant. So, I mean, these are nuggets of wisdom, and I can quote many, many more. So, and lastly, Nishtha, it is a remarkable literary work. The sheer dexterity, the exquisiteness of the composition, the upmas, the comparisons, the analogies, the rhyme, the meter, the flow, the lyricism. That is why it sits so easily on your tongue. And that is why it is recited so universally, at least in North India, because there are many Ramayans, as you know, as part of the Hindu tradition of allowing for diversity within a central narrative.
Right.
So that's for all these reasons I was writing on Ram, and I'm happy that it came out around, I mean, it was out a little before, as it so happened, this mega event, the Shilanyas took place of the Ram Mandir.
Right. Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned the existence of many Ramayans, because when Tulsidas had written Ramcharitmanas, he was hounded by the Pandits, who said that how dare you desecrate this sacred book, which talks about the glory of the foremost avatar of Vishnu, by making it accessible to everybody, by using a language that doesn't befit the pure of the story. So, what do you say? Now it has become, and now history has come a full circle here, because Ramcharitmanas has become the canonical Ramayana, particularly for the North Indians. And there have been instances in, say, many years ago, there was a controversy in university when they said that, A.K. Ramanujan's idea of many Ramayans is actually sacrilegious.
I'll tell you, this business of seeing the diversity that Hinduism at a conceptual level itself sanctions as being either blasphemous or the opposite conclusion, that because of so much diversity, there is nothing such as a unified singular Hinduism at all. Both are wrong, in my view. The Ramayana, Valmiki's Ramayana, although written in Sanskrit, caught the popular imagination like a tidal wave. And over the centuries since he wrote it, there have been many versions of the Ramayana, and not all of them are in Sanskrit. There is the Tamil Ramayana, Kamban's Ramayana, and many other Ramayans. There is the Odia Ramayana. And all of these Ramayans add to it their local color, the regional variation, the greater emphasis on one character as against the other, to adopt the central narrative of the Ramayana story better for themselves. So first of all, please understand that in Hinduism, this diversity is one of the USPs of this religion. In Hinduism, there is not one system of philosophy. There are 6 systems of philosophy. And all of them can be almost called atheist, because they are not talking of deity or divinity, but of what can. But in addition, the realist school, the Charvak school, which questions even the sanctity of the Vedas. But then Adi Shankaracharya does the same. In the Nirvana Shatakam, which you must be familiar with, he writes, na mantro, na tirtham, na vedo, na yagna. Nothing matters. What matters? Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. And he also further commits blasphemy as per Abrahamic faiths by saying, I am Shiva, I am God. You know that when that Muslim Sufi, Islamic Sufi said, Anaul Haq, I am God, he was executed. But here I'm saying Hinduism, which allows for this. Here Shankaracharya with reviving him, and is the greatest proponent Advaita is called, which is the Advaita school of Hinduism. He says, none of this matters, na mantra, na tirth, na yoga, yagna, na ved. He says, na dharma, na charth, na kam, na moksha. None of the 4 purushats matter. Only thing there. So that is the tradition. So when A.K. Ramanujan said, A.K. Ramanujan once made a very, he quotes an Irishman asking him. The joke is that an Irishman is asked whether trousers are singular or plural. So the Irishman says, they are singular at the top, bottom. So, precisely the way you define Hinduism. So I think there was nothing to take umbrage about the fact that there are 300 Ramayans. From Indonesia to Thailand to Cambodia to Nepal to Myanmar, where is the Ramayana not performed in accordance with local variation, cultural abilities? So that is an issue. But Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas says, see, there was in this tradition after Gita Govind, which was in Sanskrit, and by the way, Advaita, which invented Radha. In none of from Vishnu Puran to the Harivamsh to the Bhagavad, the mention of Krishna does the ras in a circle anonymous. Jayadev invents Radha because Murtimam, the epitome of the sensual mood, he spoil in Radha, who became Raseshwari, the embodiment of that rasa, really opened a tidal wave of bhakti literature. A lot of it dedicated to Radha and Krishna. And you have Chandid Sanskrit. You have Vidyapati writing in Maithili. You have Surdas writing in Braj. And you have a host of other writers. Bihari. They all are writing in the common man, which is of the Bhakti movement, where from Sanskrit, that Sanskrit was exclusively a language of the elite. Sanskrit was definitely a language of the elite, but Sanskrit moved to Prakrit, moved to other local languages very fast, and there was an interaction between the two. Sanskrit absorbed words from the local dialects and vice versa. From Sanskrit, in the Bhakti movement, of which Tulsidas is a shining example, it moved to the local languages. And so he wrote in Avadhi, but there was obviously, if you read Tulsidas himself, a group of his peer group who thought that writing in any other language except Sanskrit is not appropriate. And Tulsidas takes such critics head on. And there is an apocryphal tale that to test whether this book in Avadhi comes up to the mark, they put a
stack of books
in the Vishwanath Ka Mandir in Kashi. And when the doors open in the morning, Tulsidas's book, Ramcharitmanas, has been put right at the bottom of the heap. And in the morning, it's right at the top, with Shiva having blessed it himself with the one line, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So the language of the masses is important.
Right. Advaita, I'm so glad that he ended his sentence with the language of the masses. Now, are a language of masses as a writer. Right now, when we appropriate a religious figure, right, and take it to the masses through cinema, what are the dangers? Because everybody is, though Pavanji would not like anybody to take umbrage, but there are people who are waiting to take umbrage over even fictitious characters. Forget about a religious character. So, what are these landmines that a film writer has to navigate?
It's really your approach. I think it's sort of almost lazy writing when you have to be provocative about a religious figure, and that's not necessarily. I'm not necessarily speaking in religious faith. That's lazy writing. I have in the past, in my film Kahani, for example, I used Durga Puja, and even the poster, if you see the poster, the way it was designed, like she was a Durga, and the journey that. And our climax was actually shot during the Visarjan day, which was Durga Puja, So I, brass and tacks, I needed her to find an escape. And I had lived in Kolkata and I had seen these beautiful women come out in their white saris with the red borders. And I said, oh my God, what a clever way it would be for her to escape and just tie back into, the whole symmetry of the narrative. Along with, the fact that the person who's helping her, the cop who's helping her is Satyaki, who is the charioteer. you know. So in that, so there were these little nods to the faith, as it were, and her being that embodiment of power and shakti, which I did indulge in. And I would say, if I wrote that film today, they would say this is Hindutva propaganda. You know, that's how polarized and the discourse has become, that, you know, either you are criticized for using some things in a certain way, or you're kind of lampooned for using them in a certain way. I think as a writer, as a creative writer, we do have to realize the power that we hold, and that power is the power of mainstreaming. So a lot of attitudes, a lot of opinions are streamed through our film, and we have to be careful about what we, not just from the religious perspective, but even as a female writer, I'm very particular that I don't want to be associated. For example, at one time it was with item songs and things like that. I didn't want to write a script where there would be room for that kind of exploitative objectification of women. So, you know, these are things that I personally draw the line on, you know, when it comes to women, when it comes to people's religious beliefs. I don't want to go there. Would I go into a space where I see exploitation in the name of religion? And that's something that people across faiths do? Yes, I would go into that. I would go into that if there was something exploitative. But in terms of, you know, people's belief systems and things like that, I wouldn't want to mock them or, you know, capitalize them by using crazy titles or, you know, certain kind of embodiments to feel like, you know, yes, my film should be talked about.
Right.
You know, may I just add to what she said? You see, I'll tell you, religions can be interrogated. At least Hinduism allows it, and interrogated very stringently. But some things are a matter of faith, and in the context of Ram, for instance, there was in London, I think, a talk that the well-known Hindu scholar from America, Wendy Doniger, was giving, mentioned by her in her book on Hinduism. And I think my good friend William Dalrymple was chairing that event. And an egg was thrown at her. And why was it thrown? And she, of course, mentions this, that because she seemed to indicate through messages in Valmiki's Ramayana that there was a relationship between Sita ji and Lakshman. Now, okay, if it's written explicitly, well and good. We are not a prudish faith also, as you know. And whatever the interpretations of some modern zealots may be, we are not. But, you know, for titillation, for creating, you know, the impact by an obiter dicta, purpose of, there are people's faith, you know, one is the role model, is his brother's wife. And actually made that innovation, self-acknowledges later in the same passage when Ram and Lakshman, Sita, after abducted by Ram, finds a salary. And is this her? Lakshman's reply is, I wouldn't know. I have never looked up when I see her beyond her ankles. Take something out of context, quote it out of sheer, you know, provocation or titillation where great faith is involved. There's a lot of intolerance if you do it with Christianity, by the way, and I can quote chapter and verse out of it. And of course, with Islam, it becomes straight away blasphemy. Hinduism allows all of this, but there are limitations to it. And I tend to agree with Advaita that don't mess with faith unless you have very good reason to do so. And if you have to do it, please do it in Hinduism, which allows for it.
Right. So I then want to ask the text itself, because that has been used time and again by both by both the sides. Let me just say, let's not adjectivize it at all. By people who say that yes, caste system is something that has been sanctioned, and you know what verse I'm talking about. It's like Dhol. Gawar, Shudra Pashunari, ye sab taran ke adhikari. Now, it is very problematic. It has been used by both the sides by saying on one hand that yes, it is problematic, but it also is reflective of that Tulsidas was writing in. So that was the reality of the society, and the others say no, but because it comes in such an important text that it also becomes prescriptive. What do you have to say to that then? Then should we not counter it because it will, it will irk some people in the matters of faith?
So I'll give you an answer which puts your query, which is very relevant in a perspective. First of all, in terms of modern sensibility and my own ideological convictions, I find that particular line, if it was actually written by Tulsidas and was not an addition added on later, as most objectionable from the point of view of respect for gender and on the point of view of our commitment to egalitarianism. So it's definitely objectionable. Now let's contextualize this whole answer that I'm giving you in a minute's time. You see, even in Valmiki's Ramayana, there was the Uttarkand, where a lot of women feel that the manner in which Ram dealt with Sita carried his halo of Maryada Purushottam too far, and his doing the will and fulfilling his duty, he should have and used his faculties of judgment, obvious devotion to put to test. Today, a considerable opinion feels that the Uttarkand in Valmiki's Ramayana is a later addition. Because as you know, texts which have been written years before the birth of Christ or before, in their evolution up to modern times, become very potent weapons in the hands of legitimize existing power structures. And that the Uttarkand, both in terms of its textual style, and the fact that it comes at the appendium, because Tulsidas no such difference. It ends
right.
That whole section. Perhaps it was the same tenders applied to Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas. Perhaps that was a line that was added. If it was not, it's objectionable. Tulsidas, he has a partiality to Brahman. If you read the Ramcharitmanas. But where Bhakti is concerned, for instance, he meets Shabri. He tell Lakshman, he says, Jati Pati Kul Dharma Badhai. Jati Pati Kul Dharma Badhai Dhana Bal Parijan Gun Chaturai. None of these are of any consequence. Bhagati Heen Nar Sohati Kaise. Bhagat, a person, Bhagati Heen Sohai Bin Dekhiye Jaise. A person without bhakti appears cloud which does not have within it water to rain down.
Right.
So for him it does not matter at all because bhakti is the ultimate. And I can quote other lines. I mean, it matters. So that is one aspect of it. Now, as far as women are concerned, rarely has a book given this kind of exalted prominence to, we were the make women goddesses. And as you know, the Devi Mahatya written in the 6th century Christ is made the Devi the ultimate God. Even, she was not a consort. She was not a derivative. She was the only divine principle. So, Tulsidas's tributes to Sita are really worth reading, whether in terms of her beauty, whether in terms of her qualities, whether in terms of her conduct. You should see it. I mean, when she's going to do the Jaimal and they've met, and she's met Ram, and he writes, and now she says, Sakhina madhya siya sohati kaise, chabigana madhya maha chabi jaise. I mean, this is just, and then when he describes her beauty, see how he does it. Sundarta kahu sundar kare. She makes even the beautiful more beautiful. Chabigrah deepa shikha janubare. Like in a dark house full of portraits, somebody just lights a lamp. So that glow. So he gives her the upadhi of that Shakti of Shiva. Can you take the dog out here, please? Sorry, I'm so sorry. My
It's okay.
dogs have come.
Okay.
So he gives her the upadhi of Maya, which is the Chitta Swarup of Brahm. Uma is the Chitta Shakti of Shiva. And she makes possible the manifestation of that undifferentiated consciousness into form. So Maya is not just ignorance. And Tulsidas says, Ubhay beach, between the two brothers as they are in the forest. See a sohati kaise. How does she look? Brahma Jiva Bich Maya jaise. Between the Brahm and the Jeev, she is the Maya. So he pays through her as the embodiment great tribute to women. But yes, there is that line, and I don't agree with it either.
Right. Advaita, I'll come back to Pavanji with another question to ghero him on this question of representation of women and the very problematic ideas that are there in Ramcharitmanas. Advaita, your idea about the problematic aspects of religion, how would you counter them? Or would you rather not touch them? Would you rather not go there?
Hindu has reformed, it continues to reform. That's an intrinsic quality. So I don't think that that's something that anyone should shy away of time. If we sit here and say, there is no casteism, I think that's foolishness and that's being blind. So there is that ability to self-evaluate that we must never lose and question, like Pavanji rightly said. That's one of our greatest strengths, and that's why we have survived for centuries and really, under different forms of rule and oppression. We've still managed to maintain that because of this ability to evolve with times, and that's not something that we should ever let go of. But the other thing, I found that reference to this context of the argument that these things that were said in the Ramcharitmanas by Tulsidas, the author, were things that are very not of a certain time. It kind of reminds me of what's happening with J.K. Rowling, or did very recently, when the way she was writing about trans people, trans women, and who should be defined as women. And it was a very hard argument at this point of time. I dare say in 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, when gender dynamics are very different, when science plays a greater role, what J.K. Rowling has said would probably sound very, very outdated. And, already you're seeing, I saw an advisory that said, a person's please get her cervical cancer advisory. So, we're already adopting that language. So it's quite likely that, J.K. Rowling, as loved as she is, as famous as she is, as popular as her books are, they've shaped generations, really, at least the last 2 or 3 who've grown up reading books, will really, be the next of time, as will anything that survives time. So I think, that's the way really we need to view this.
Right. Pavanji, as I promised you. So, the charge against Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas says that it actually, it puts Sita on a very high pedestal, and that robs her of the humanity, the earthy nature of Sita in Valmiki's Ramayana.
No, you see, you can choose your role model for Sita. There's one Valmiki's Ramayana. Already in Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, while she does not play a very key or active role as a character unto herself, moving the whole narrative,
Yes.
her worship and reverence, she gets far more space than in Valmiki's Ramayana. Let me put it like that. And if you read the other versions of the Ramayana, the Adhyatma Ramayana,
Yes.
she has a totally different role. And if you come down to modern times, if you read Amish on his book on Sita, she's the prime mover. So, as Advaita mentioned earlier, which I agree with, that one of the things about Hinduism is that it continues to evolve, providing the right emphasis with changing times, and it's got the resource material to do it. The canvas is very wide. The dramatis personae are too many. It's not one god, one pope, one church, one ritual, one text. So it has the scope to exist.
Right. But sir, when it comes to the political appropriation of Hinduism, I'm loath to call it Hindutva because, Hindutva is a beautiful word, right? It is the essence of being a Hindu. But it's now become politicized. The word itself carries political connotations that are also negative because of all the militarized, ecosystem that it moves in, right? That whoever does not believe that Ramchandra was born in Ayodhya are all heretics. They don't believe in, in either Hinduism or in Indian values. So it's getting rather. So I would just take another 30 seconds. So, and Ram being the deity, right? So, I mean, it's as if that people from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, Hindus from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, they worship nobody else but Ram. And that's so far from truth that I don't have to say this. How is it happening, this unilateral view of Hinduism?
So the appropriation of Ram for political purposes, in many ways, I think is both unnecessary and doomed to failure. Because you cannot convert Hinduism to serve a political purpose overnight in a fixed time zone.
But you can definitely do it in 1 century.
But because I'll tell you, a Shaivite, and by the way, I pray every morning to Om Namo Shivaya. Although I've written a book on the Vishnu avatars, Ram and Krishna. Hindus are harmonious schizophrenics, Nishtha. They will worship extravagantly, humanize their gods. Their birth, their marriage, their wars, their love affairs at one level. And we say we have lakhs of deities. At another level, in the back of the mind of every Hindu is that these are merely the forms of that ultimate, unindivisible divinity, which is Brahm. So he can pray, he can make a rock into a god, a tree into a god, she or she. So these, to say that Ram is the only god in Hinduism, I don't think will happen that easily. Now, what can happen is for some people to try to make Hinduism prescriptive. That Ayodhya is now the papal center for Hinduism. Ram Bhakts are a specially privileged lot, and so on. So, you see, I'll tell you that Ram, for me, Advaita can add to this. is a Maryada Purushottam, which is the epitome of rectitude, of acting in a manner which is at all times judicious, in equilibrium and equipoise. That does not make him into a passive god. I'm coming to the end of my argument. He fought a war. He fought against injustice, against Ravan. Hinduism ही एक ऐसा religion हुआ कि रावण की भी प्रशस्ति होती है. The heavens rain down flowers on Ravan also, on Duryodhan also, by the way, in the Mahabharata, but that's another area of discussion. So, he's not a passive god, but I don't think he's a god who would legitimize for the millions upon millions of his believers irrational anger, unwarranted violence, or emotions of vengeance. And, you know, if you called Ramcharitmanas a near canonical work for so many Hindus, the lines are there in the in the Ramcharitmanas. You know, when he's born, Tulsi writes, Bhai Pragata Kripala, Deena Dayala, the merciful, the protector of the weak, Karuna Gun Sukha Sagar, the ocean of compassion. He tells, and I quote this line often, he tells Bharat, Parhit saris dharam nahi bhai, par peeda sam nahi athmai. There is no greater good than the welfare of others and no greater evil than an injury to another. So even when he fights against injustice, he does it within the framework of correct behavior in accordance with, I would define it today as law. He bears no personal enmity to Ram. And so similarly, to take the law into your own hands would be a derogation of Ram, Maryada Purushottam Ram from my point of view. So there are several planes on which, let me say to you, we are not prescriptive, we cannot be. We have many deities, so it can never ever become Ram for, you know, Shiva followers, the Mahadev or Vishnu's or his avatars. And we accommodate all of them within the scope of our cranium. It doesn't require us, this is an effortless accommodation. It doesn't put any great pressure or burden on us. And by the way, it's illustrated by the Ramayana. Who tells the story? Manas. Shiva is among the narrators, and what is Ram pays the most remarkable and moving tribute to Shiva. Namami Shami Shama Nirvana Rupam Vibhum Vyapakam Brahma Veda Swarup. So I'm saying Ram himself, and what does Shiva say about Ram? Jai Ram Rama Ramanang Shamanang Bhavata Bayakul Pahi Janam Avadesha Suresha Ramesha Vibho Sharanangat Mangat Pahi Prabhu. So there is no antagonism.
Right. Advaita, about antagonism and political project of, making Hinduism and Hindus a linear sort of entity.
There are two aspects of it. One is, of course, the ideological aspect, and one is, the political aspect. Now, if you view it from the ideological aspect, and I assume that, the discussion will be centered around the RSS and its ideologues and the kind of things that they've said. In that context, you will find, when you read them, a lot of openness to diversity, and even the discussed Guruji Govalkar is somebody who has spoken about, the diversity and forms of worship between faiths, in between people. And there has been never any, claiming in terms of saying that, this one practice or this one God supersedes any other. That has never come to the forefront. What you cannot deny on the political front is that when previous political parties were filing affidavits in Supreme Court, questioning whether Ram existed at all, or questioning the Setu, Ram Setu, or changing the name of the rainbow, Ramdhenu to Rangadhenu, to make it more secular, it was only really the Bharatiya Janata Party who stood up and raised objections, which a lot of people felt with this kind of nitpicking and this kind of, legalese that adopted to, in many ways, delegitimize the faith and the belief system of so many people, the majority in this country. So if today, you say that this is an appropriation, no, I think they were doing this at a time when it wasn't very popular to be identified with this kind of politics. It was looked down upon when the different avenues of discourse were controlled, more tightly controlled. But since there's been a democratization of discourse, you're seeing a lot more people come forward and express themselves on platforms and be exposed to many other views, as well as air their views to many, many more people, ordinary people, with a result that, you have this sort of response which is needed, because you wouldn't question that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. You would just accept that, so why do you feel the need to go on about Ayodhya and whether it is the birthplace or not, to go on about there was never a Ram temple when there was an excavation that revealed that there was one, and this was known 20 years ago, but it was concealed. So these are all things that really, agitate someone, and they say that why do this? Why do it? You wouldn't do that with any other faith.
But that's not true, Advaita, because in every religion, in every part of the world, there has been this questioning. I mean, Bombay start from Copernicus and Galileo Galilei, and the kind of ideas that they were challenging and they paid a good price for holding those values and holding those ideas and spreading them across. That hang on, the world is, the universe does not revolve around us. It's actually the earth, our planet that goes around the sun. So we are not the center of the universe. And that was considered heresy. Right, so it's not correct that no other religion gets questioned. Of course, I mean, every religion gets questioned. And the questioners are always, they are either willing to pay that price, but they're also, in a way, made into the champions of rationality. So what is wrong in questioning whether Ram indeed was born in Ayodhya or not?
Well, you're speaking about individuals doing the question. The original question was about politicians. So I was answering in the context of politics and the fact that politicians have done those who claim secular credentials, have done the questioning of the faith of Hindus in such ways as appealing with an affidavit in the Supreme Court when they would not for other faiths. And this is where, when we were speaking of appropriation and why is it being appropriated by one party. So my answer to that was that this party is associated with this deity because they have not taken these kind of steps. They have not challenged his historicity. They have not challenged the belief of people. So what you're calling appropriation is really a natural confluence of ideology and faith, which they have represented on numerous occasions. Of course, individuals can question and have questioned. We were discussing political parties.
Right. Pavanji, now you resigned from the political party that you were associated with for a long, long time. And right after that, the book has come and the Shilanyas has happened.
Right after that.
No, I mean, yes, a few months later than that. Yeah, these things have happened. No, has your political ideology framed your reading of religion, mythology, as well as the cultural ruminations that you often engage in?
No, actually, Nishtha, my politics has very little to do with what I write, except that I have had an inner urging, not from now, for at least 40 years now, to get deeper under the skin of India's culture, civilization, legacy, thought process, philosophy, aesthetics, etc. My first book, as some of your viewers may remember, was on Mirza Ghalib.
Yes.
And it did very well. It was my first book. and it was on his poetry and his life and his times. I've also written on Krishna. I've written a long poem which Gulzar Saab translated, and it was published again, as you know, Yudhishthir and Draupadi. And I have written on a variety of other subjects, including Chanakya. I've written on the great Indian middle class. I've written on being Indian, becoming Indian. I've written a novel. So I've written on Adi Shankaracharya. But I do believe that the elements of Hindu culture and civilization reflect an exceptionally cerebral legacy. For a moment, I'm not saying that it has any monopoly over this. But as a person who's a Hindu, I marvel at some of its audacious insights. I marvel at its historicity. I marvel at the Upanishads, which inspired, of course, Advaita's name, the Advaita school of thought, and so on and so forth. The myriad reflections of that compressed cerebral energy. And I want to be familiar. In fact, one of the things I lament, Nishtha, is that a lot of us, especially of the younger generation, are that much poorer by not having any idea of it. They don't know. I mean, when I wrote Adi Shankaracharya, which did very well otherwise, and as languages as well, many people didn't know which century he was born in. They didn't know he was born in Kerala and took Samadhi in Kedarnath. They knew nothing. No, ultimately this produces a society, and I'm not for even remotely making a case for xenophobia or cultural paranoia, but I am definitely making a case against cultural rootlessness, where your only attribute, which is your saving grace, is to be able to speak English in a certain accent. You have got to go beyond that. I mean, you can't be in a country like ours with the civilization legacy like us to read Shakespeare and know nothing about Thiruvallur or Kalidas. It creates curiosity even in foreigners because nobody respects photocopies.
Right. Advaita, now since we are drawing closer to our time to wrap this discussion, I want to ask from you. So let's end this on the note of your 5 things that you want to see in contemporary Ram Rajya. Also, Advaita, can you shift your camera a little bit?
Yes,
Is that fine?
Now you're fine.
I'm fine. Oh, okay. I was just listening to Pavanji, and you know, whether you agree or disagree with his politics, he's just so mesmerizing as a speaker that you can be hypnotized into agreeing with anything he says.
Yes.
I mean, he has such beautiful knowledge and language, and you know, I just want to ask you one question quickly before I answer Nishtha's.
Go ahead.
Pavanji, you know, you have pretty much done for the present generation what Tulsidas did back in the day while writing in.
Very, very unfair comparison because I don't figure anywhere in it.
No, because you may not figure it, but you know, my mother tongue, so to speak, is Avdi. So it's very familiar to me in terms of, you know, I had a childhood where it's been spoken around me. And so it's very sweet and it's nostalgic. But there is that gap between, you know, my childhood and the adult I am today. And this book fits so perfectly into that gap that I just see so many thousands of people just reaching out to it because it just starts to make so much sense. So many of the things that just go on, like Sanskrit shlokas or, you know, chopais going on in the background that we kind of hear and nod to, you've just translated it in many ways just beautifully. So I want to ask you, was that your intention, or did you set out to do that, or is that just how you speak?
I was just answering a question. It's not about how I speak. You know, you are absolutely right, Nishtha, because in our case, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, for us, it may even be for some people some exotica. There is an epic in this Avadhi in which, you know, Advaita is rediscovering again, and I am rediscovering again. But for millions upon millions of Hindus in North India, it's what they quote, it's what they recite, it's what they sing, it's how they pray, and the earthy wisdom out of it. For instance, he says, I mean, secular, let me give you a secular line out of Tulsidas. Sachiv Abed Guru Tino Jon. Sachiv, in government, Ved, doctor, Guru, your spiritual. Sachiv Abed Guru Tino Jon. Bole Bhai Preetas. Speak out of either fear or for earning favor. Bole Bhai Preetas. Tan Dhana Dharma Tino So. Hoye Begahi Nas. Tan, all three will very soon meet with this. It's a political party, including the BJP and the Congress and all the rest in between. It affects people's lives. They live it like this.
Right. Advaita, very quickly, 5 things that you want to see in your Ram Rajya today.
Ram Rajya, Ram Rajya, I would like to see equal laws across the board. I would like to see opportunities for those who are truly, vulnerable across the board, irrespective of caste, creed, faith. I would like to see really get to that point when it comes to being equal participants in the future of this country. And they are also nation builders. And the fourth would be, of course, the children of these countries, of our country, the kind of exploitation we see, the child labor. Those are the things. I think every child in this country childhood. And I hope in Ram Rajya, we will get that childhood. And fifth, and most of all, I would look for just peace and getting along and moving a future for our future generations.
Well said.
Rajya wish list.
Well, it's quite a bit like that. I would definitely like a democratic order. Ram Rajya has to be democratic. I would like it to be one which generates wealth. Kautilya says in Arthashastra, none of the other survive until there is wealth.
Absolutely.
I would like less inequality, for that wealth to percolate down and be evenly distributed. 1% of India controls nearly 60% of its wealth, and the bottom 10% controls 0.2%. I would like that to end. The gender parity, an equal society in every respect, not men and women and all other categories, to be looked upon equally. And I would like, above all, sab nar karahi. I would like harmony and tranquility.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, Advaita, go ahead.
And kindness, really. And some yada in public discourse.
Yeah.
We can start there.
This is growing.
We can start there.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that I'm able to get people like Advaita and Pavanji, that there is absolutely no mudslinging. There is, there is always sort of dialogue, because, goes further when it's monologue, right? You have to listen to the other and respond, and your response cannot be unparliamentary. If you can do self, but somehow, yes, those are left, right, and center. And no, it comes to crossing the Maryada Rekha, of conversation. Yes, yes. I mean, the beauty of, as you said, I think the dialogism, what Bhakti had said about, dialogism. And if you talk about Hindutva, I think that's the prime defining feature, that there is this paraspar ek dialogue hai, that is very much there. You can agree and disagree with each other at the same time and still be polite.
I think, Nishtha, it's wonderful that, you are defining Hindutva in a different way, because so much of it is just defined in the political context. So, I mean, I've really enjoyed that part of this conversation, to see that, there can be in discourse, in public discourse, a space for a definition of Hindutva that is stereotype in that sense.
Stereotypes actually take us thus, like, and they're always black and white. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Book.
Thank you, Nish. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavanji. Thank you.